So we begin. We begin with the Stony Brook Seawolves on a well-deserved Christmas break, but both the men's and the women's basketball teams riding high. The men still have one game left in the non-conference schedule, a game against Farmingdale, which should look to them like the Florida Gators saw the Seawolves the other day. But in any case, they should be getting that out of the way and then looking ahead to the America East schedule. And everybody is, because it starts with, well, first off, this time next week, we will be talking about the opener against Hartford. So, pencil in a win, well, they can surprise you. Then UMBC and Maine home games during the week. But the women, on the other hand, they are going to be busy as well, because they, as is the custom in women's basketball and men's basketball in the America East schedule, when one is away, one is home. And we will not be broadcasting the men's game only because the women are going to be at home against guess who? That's right, January 2nd, Sunday afternoon, it'll be Hartford. So, Ken, you there? Talk to me. Not getting you. Hold on just a second. Make sure this is all... Oh, now I know I'm not getting you. Somebody unplugged you. Just a second. Okay, hold on. There we go. Now I can hear you. Go ahead.
There we go, Matt. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to all the listeners, first off. And second, as you said, looking forward to this America East schedule. Both these basketball programs got to be happy where they're at so far. The men's club 7-5 through their first 12 games. The women having the best record in the conference, only one loss through their first 10 contests, and the favorites to repeat as champions. And for both of these teams, to me, they both look like teams that are strong contenders, likely contenders, to be that top seed at the end of the conference regular season.
It all begins with, we've talked about Hartford. Everybody knows by now what the situation is with them. And, we tried to be as gracious as we possibly can, because it's definitely beyond the student-athletes' control what's happening to them. And in case you haven't been listening, Hartford is downgrading to Division III, and therefore they are basically playing out the string in the America East in anticipation of losing the athletic scholarships and coming in at a much lower profile. And of course, I'm sure the alumni aren't happy, but that's, again, their problem. Fortunately, here at Stony Brook, the curve is trending upward, especially for the basketball programs, but not just for the basketball programs, as we will be talking a little bit about the spring sports too when we get a chance. But looking ahead right now, where do you want to start? You want to start with the men, because we do have, of course, Farmingdale coming up, and like I said, that should be a game that, the Seawolves will be tuning up, I'm sure. There'll be a 6:31 start, 6:31 p.m., 6:15 here on WUSB. And then a relatively easy game. I have to, you know what, folks, that's the way it is. But
I will say
the schedule really starts with the Seawolves the following Thursday, January 6th, and January 8th, Thursday and Saturday, 2 quick games at home, UMBC and Maine, and then they go to Vermont.
I will say that Hartford usually plays a close contest, even if they're not winning, like we saw last season, they're still relatively close. And a couple seasons ago, of course, with Hartford upsetting the Seawolves at home right before everything shut down for the pandemic. So, or rather, that was on the road. But yeah, right before everything shut down with the pandemic. So, these two teams play hard, both on the men's and women's side, over the past few years. But yeah, as you said, this Hartford team is really a skeleton crew of, their former selves from just 3-4 years ago, between all the graduates and leveling down to D3, as you said. And I agree, for Stony Brook, they're going to be looking, a lot more, and really put more emphasis and focus on their identity on those games against NJIT and Vermont in particular, two teams who could challenge them amongst the top of the standings, Vermont especially.
Well, Vermont's always a challenge, and Vermont is especially a challenge up in Burlington, and that's where the first meeting will occur. And the result of that is the Seawolves will get a quick test early on in the American East schedule to see if they're really all that. I mean, look, we've seen some very nice wins coming from this team in the non-conference schedule. We saw, nice win at Yale, a stinker at Wagner against Wagner, but then bouncing back to beat Hofstra handily. Very nice win against Bryant, blowing out Central Connecticut State. But I think the most impressive win in recent memory, I think, is the St. Peter's game where they won by a point. That one showed that their grit a little bit. And Florida's one you just write off because they're going up against an SEC team, and a good SEC team, a ranked SEC team. So down in Gainesville, no less.
It was impressive what they did. They lost 87-62, but neither team shot under 50% on the day. The Seawolves, they shot nearly 51% overall. And, it goes to show that, they got that strength in that offense that they've really been lacking the past couple seasons. So when you're going to go up against a formidable opponent like Florida and you're shooting at 50%, it's pretty impressive, especially considering, they really couldn't rely heavily on the three because of how well Florida was transitioning and pressing against them. So they had to go inside, and they missed a lot of shots inside, of course. That's why they lost. But, just still to be able to shoot 5 of 19 from three-point range and have some of those bigs like Jaden Sales step up inside, going 8 of 9 on the afternoon.
You know what, though?
Inside. It's a good sign for them.
It's a legit concern. First of all, Florida didn't foul the Seawolves very much. They didn't need to. Nope. And the Seawolves went 1 for 6 on the line. And it's not going to make a big difference in the game. You lose by 25, you make 5 or 6, so that's 4 points to the game, to the board. But the problem here is you just don't go have that low free throw percentage in any game. And, if you're on the coaching staff, you're saying, guys, Anthony Roberts, you can't miss 5 shots on the line. I don't care how beat up you are. Okay, you can't do that because you're going to be in a game where it matters. And that's where, if you're not hitting him with consistency, it's going to show up. 0 for 5 from 3. He was 1 for 2, from free throws. I'm looking at 0 for 3 for Green and 0 for 1. I mean, 1 free throw. Roberts hit the only free throw of the game. Excuse me. That's not going to cut it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think a positive towards that, though, is at least they are attempting a lot. 165 so far this season, shooting 68% overall from the line. Agree, you want to be hitting at least 70% from that range. But, and especially when you consider you got 4 teams there shooting above 70, UMBC just a sliver above 80%. But I got to say, that's a good problem to have when you look at this team, and they're right up there in leading the conference in threes made, shooting 34% from 3-point range, and overall shooting about 44% or 43% from the floor.
This is where the number that really stands out at you, though, is that, and again, it's going to happen. It's simply the manpower that an SEC team has against an America East team up front. You're getting out rebounded 40-21, and the guys are just bigger. Okay,
yep.
It can't be. It sort of can't be helped, but it also tells you again that not only are they out rebounding you, but they're not fouling you under the basket. So you're not going to the line at all. So there's a double whammy there. And, where do you find a solution? The solution, for better or worse, to play with a team like that is to try lots of threes and hit them. And 19 threes is not a lot. I mean, no. Florida hit the 23 themselves. I mean, it's nothing compared to what we've seen other teams do. So Washington State do last week. They're chucking threes all over the place. Again, I'm talking about the women's side, but it's the Seawolves, and I'd like to see this change. I'd like to see this become more of a trend in the other direction. The Seawolves have a history of not relying very heavily on three-point shooting and being very pleasantly surprised when they get it. And in a situation like this, to go up against Vermont, a team that does match them in size, you're going to have to hit some shots from beyond the arc. And that, I think, might be a concern going down the stretch. could decide a game. That's one thing you got to be really worried about. It's a one thing aspect of their game, from my point of view, that gives me concern right now.
Yeah, I do think, though, they're going to rely more on the three ball, just because already so far this season, 33% of their field goals made have come from beyond the arc. So you've already seen the results there. As we said, they've been instrumental in some of the Seawolves wins, whether it be, that big win from a couple weeks ago against Central Connecticut, or that win at the buzzer versus St. Peter's. It was, or rather, Sacred Heart back in November.
St. Peter's was saved on a block.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
but I think we're gonna start to see that, especially because, as you said, the size isn't necessarily there this year compared to the past couple seasons. Where you had that, those 2 or 3, 6'11", 7-foot guys. I'm thinking of Cherry, thinking of Mo Gees, things like that. People like that. Alex Christie's still there, but he's relatively a bench player at the end of the bench. Playing 1 to 3 minutes a game. In most games, he has played a little bit in several others, but for this team, their strength, I think, going forward is going to be the 3-point game, knocking down and getting a consistent mid-range game going as well, and relying on those guys to just find each other there at the top of the key or finding them around the perimeter.
So, as we said, a tune-up game, because Farmingdale State is not necessarily on the Seawolves level as far as...
I got a feeling Stony Brook's going to be shooting a lot of threes against Farmingdale.
Well, you know what? Get some practice in. It can't hurt. And I think that's going to be, like I said, a good tune-up for the American East schedule. They'll go up to Hartford Chase Family Arena, which is traditionally, back when Hartford was a fully competitive member of the American East, a house of horrors for both men's and women's teams.
Yep. So,
yeah, you're right. You always have that little thing in the back of your head with Chase Family Arena that, I don't know. This team may be struggling now, but they somehow managed to give the Seawolves trouble. But that's how the American East schedule opens, and again, the men will be away and the women will be home at the same time, so we'll be airing the women's game. But that sets up the perfect segue to the women, because they are going to be rather quiet. They will have a nice Christmas holiday, because we won't be seeing them again until they begin their American East schedule at NJIT on Thursday. So that's a 2 p.m. start. That's also interesting, because the schools are off. So they can have day games or evening games. Only problem is the public is not. So, they might pay to have a night game, but
right.
the women will be starting at NJIT, where the budding rivalry between the two schools is growing. And then they'll get Hartford, as we said. And just like the men, they will be at UMBC and at Maine when the men are home against UMBC and Maine. And same situation when it comes to Vermont. Why we're not airing the Vermont game up in Burlington, because the women will be hosting Vermont here at the Allen Federal Credit Union Arena.
Yeah, this women's team, I think even more so than the men, are really the top contenders for the America East. And I was predicted at the start of the season, they lived up to the hype. Coming in under coach Ashley Langford, her coming in from JMU, it was definitely a big shift from Caroline McCombs in her several seasons here, where she really helped the program, start to get to that next level, get a couple conference titles, get that trip to the NCAA tournament last season. With some players, graduating, obviously Haley Zeiss being the big one, she was a defensive anchor graduating from this program. There were definitely some question marks there. How are they going to adjust to that? And they've adjusted to that pretty well. As we said, 9-1 record, big, huge win against Washington State, who were receiving votes as of a couple weeks ago. And that, too, being a game that wasn't even planned up until the week of said contest happened.
And they made a huge detour to get to us.
That's right.
And I mentioned it during the game broadcast, but they played Brigham Young the day before in Provo, Utah, got on a private plane and flew to Stony Brook. So, like I said, the background behind that story has to be epic. I mean, Mike Anderson writing for Statesman needs to dig some stuff up on that, because how do you come up with that? I mean, obviously, in this situation that we're in with games being postponed in professional cases and canceled. By the way, that's another little thing that Jeff Bernstein mentioned, is that even conference games won't be made up if the COVID gets in the way. So that's going to make a real mess if this Omicron continues to wreak havoc the way it has. But keep your fingers crossed, because so far the games that Seawolves, both the men and the women, had canceled were due to the opponent, not them. Again, good job, but keep your fingers crossed. But in any case,
yeah, honestly, to me though, it does feel like it's sort of breath of fresh air. Where that's a huge threat, but to me, I feel like as of where we're at right now, to me that's the biggest threat. Towards how well the Seawolves team performs is who gets impacted, if they get impacted, by the virus, or how they get impacted. If they lose too many games to where they won't be able to qualify for the postseason or got to shut down early, then I think that's going to be a huge blow on both of these programs that I believe have a lot of potential. And this women's team especially, who I think really are the top dogs in the America East and have the best shot of going all the way to the NCAA tournament and making some noise, beating, I believe we said it was a 9 seed in last year's NCAA tournament in Washington State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They sent Pac-12 sent 6 teams to the tournament. Washington State was a 16, but they put them in as a 9 seed, which just shows you how much the NCAA respects the Pac-12.
Yeah, and again, it's not hometown bias here. Just looking at the numbers and just seeing how these women have played, really emphasize that. Just look at statistics in the conference, and virtually everyone is led by Stony Brook. Win losses, they're the only ones above 1 or 2 teams, 3 teams above 500 with Vermont and New Albany. They're the only ones with more than 6 wins. They lead in points, averaging 70 points per game. Their points scored versus points given up margin is plus 10. Shooting wise, they're knocking down 43% of their shots. And they're the second best defense behind New Albany, giving up 36% shot defense. This team, they excel everywhere. They're great balance. We talked about that motion triangle offense they use. And it's so lethal because, you have to defend them everywhere, because they could destroy you from 3-point range, shooting 36%, or just knock it down inside, shooting 43% overall, and then get to the charity stripe as well, where they lead the conference in that. 130 free throws made, shooting 77%. This is a team where they got great shooters and scorers at every angle, and they play defense just almost as good as they do offensively, and the defense is still pretty good.
You know what? You can make a very good argument. Particularly, you don't want to do it until the season ends. But you can look back, even at the last year's team that made the NCAA and took advantage of the fact that the seniors could hang around for another year. You could make an argument that top to bottom, all the way up and down the roster, that this is the most talented women's basketball team Stony Brook has ever had.
It's
well, based on achievements last year's was, because it finally broke through the glass ceiling.
No, absolutely true. And, they're definitely on pace, I think, to match, last year's squad. And even the year before that, there's a lot of talent on these Seawolves teams past several years. And I think the addition of players like, Erlette Scott, Narmer, Vargas Reyes, Keelis Corley over the past couple seasons, Veronica Charles as well transferring in, along with some of these freshmen, or rather players who have evolved on this team since their freshman season. Gigi Gonzalez, Annie Warren, India Pagan, I think are the big 3 there that really, emphasizes that sort of structure and evolution on this team from their freshman days up until now.
What's even more important is that any one of them can carry the team on any given night.
Yep.
I mean, even Mackenzie Boucher had a career game early in the season, so she's coming off the bench. So when you have that, when you don't have to depend on one player to carry you, night in, night out, when you don't have to rely on a Kevin Durant, okay, as we'll talk about the NBA later, but they don't have that. They have different players being able to step up in different situations. I mean, Keelis Corley was definitely the star of that Washington State game, for example.
That's right. I forgot that was her first start. I
Yeah,
believe it was her first career start, just a sophomore.
yeah,
And
and
21 minutes put up 9 points on 4 or 5 shooting, including a three.
against a good Pac-12 team.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you know what that tells you? I mean,
it
she
does.
definitely scored points with the coaching staff
Yeah.
there
Oh yeah,
because I guarantee you she's going to get major minutes in the upcoming games.
yeah.
Because
And
they say
this,
if she can do that against them, forget it. Forget it. She'll be good.
yeah, and this women's program, they got 4 different scorers averaging not just above 10, above 11 points per game. And Leah Mori Wool, who's their best glass cleaner,
Mm-hmm.
India Pagan, right with her averaging 12 points a contest. And then Annie Warren and Gigi Gonzalez really being the 2 anchors of the offense because, again, both of them are so lethal anywhere, inside, outside. I think especially inside because they're so good at drawing contact and getting to the line, along with Erlet Scott. Those 3 in particular are the leading free throw makers just because they beat their defenders, on the motion. And once they get down the baseline, you have to draw contact in order to stop them.
Well, that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing as guards.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if they're not necessarily hitting well from 3, earn it on the line. And they do. But again, you don't have to depend on any one of them to carry you because, Gigi Gonzalez did not have a career afternoon against Washington State, but yet she was very important, but she wasn't necessarily among the leading scorers.
Yeah, that's true, especially, after her playing a big part in that win against Penn, scoring 14 points on 28 minutes.
Yeah, she scored only 7 in that game against Washington State on 3 for 9 shooting, but that's not what she was there for. I mean,
and again, it really encapsulates their strength. Where that offense is the best part of this team, just because there's so many different pieces that you turn to, and you kind of see it in the men, but ultimately, I think for the men, it really comes down to Jaleel Jenkins a lot of the time. It's probably going to come down to Elijah Lonnie when he returns this season, still out with that lower body injury. And, potentially Tyke Green. But, for the women, every night it seems like there's a different leading scorer or two different players who are leading the team offensively, whether it be Erlet Scott, Gigi Gonzalez, or Annie Warren and India Pagan.
Yep. And, again, something to look forward to. And that's the thing that, look, the men will always outdraw the women, at least in this part of the world, because, this isn't necessarily the case with UConn, but we're not UConn. The big thing here is that the women should be drawing better because they are very entertaining to watch. And
we've seen it too, just being at the games, that attendance really starting to step up because of that talent. And I think with the conference how it is, and just seeing them compared to the rest of the conference, you're probably get some really good games, not only in terms of them how they play, but I think in attendance, because there are a lot of games on the schedule that honestly this Eagles team should win. Not only win, but probably win by a lot, i.e. double digits, facing the Hartfords and NJITs.
You're talking about margin of victory, and you just looked up and down the schedule, and they've had against some of the tougher teams it's been a little bit closer, but still, they're racking up big wins against these teams and sometimes fairly big margins. When you beat St. John's by double digits, and then you beat Rutgers by 9 back-to-back games, and that's Sunday to Tuesday, no less, not week to week. You got to show a little bit of respect to this team. They've been getting it done, and again, I can't say it enough that in Newark at 2 p.m. on Thursday, December 30th, first of all, the defense of the title begins, but this is where it gets really, really serious because, bottom line is, yes, the polls may look at the non-conference record and your record going in, but the Seawolves, I don't know if we got any votes. The big thing here is that you got to win the conference to get to the NCAA when you're in the America East, and it starts. And some people say, the regular season record doesn't mean anything, just do it in the tournament. It means something. First of all, seeding. Second of all, your confidence going in. And if you are the best team in the conference, there are games that not only you're expected to win, you better win.
No, agreed. And so this week, I think, is a big point towards that, where honestly, this team is expected to win the first 2 or 3, If this team isn't 3-0 when they face Maine on January 9th, I'd be shocked, honestly.
Well, the thing that I'm a little confused with is that we knew in previous years, who the biggest obstacles were going to be for this team. And Maine, for example. Maine always got in their way. I'm not so sure. I mean, Maine started the season 3-7 non-conference. Now, I mean, look at their schedule, and they play some power conference teams. They played Nebraska and Providence to start their season and lost to Providence in overtime. They lost to Army in double overtime. I mean, they played these teams tough. They lost to Rhode Island by a point. But are they going to be the Maine that we are used to seeing?
Oh, it's a great question for sure. And honestly, I think you look at that roster in particular as well. They had a lot of great players, Blanco Malone being the prime example. They moved on from the program due to graduation. And, outside of Ann Simon and Maeve Carroll, that just looking at them in non-conference play, they're still looking, for, those other assets they can rely on. I really think we've seen that transition from Maine to Stony Brook in terms of the, top dogs of the conference, where you go back to those Maine games and they were in the position Stony Brook was now, where they had those 5 or 6 players they could really rely on to get it done, especially offensively, for them. And that's including with a superstar on their squad like Blanco Malone. And it's not to say Stony Brook doesn't necessarily have a superstar there now, especially you got someone like Indy Pagan, who just played in the Olympics a couple months ago. But it's more so that play style that we saw Maine have a lot, I think, is really rubbed off on the Stony Brook side, and offense especially now. And it's why I think the conference not only respects the Seawolves more so than any other program, but why they're where they're at right now as the best team overall entering conference play.
Yeah, they're definitely the best team overall. And Albany's right behind them. As we said, Albany's got the best defense, at least non-conference, going in. But, yeah, I mean, Albany's always been a problem. I mean, one way of going back and forth, same thing for the men. But that's just the nature of the business here in the America East.